If you think a trained canine can't hide pain, you've never seen what desperation looks like behind a badge. The warehouse raid ended at 11:47 p.m. 17 officers. One suspect in custody. Mission accomplished, or so they thought. In the chaos of splintered doors and shouted commands, no one noticed the dark stain spreading across the German Shepherd's left flank. Not even his handler. Officer Marcus Webb clipped the leash onto Atlas's tactical vest as sirens wailed in the distance. "Good work, boy," he muttered, his voice hoarse from yelling. Atlas's tail gave a single mechanical wag. That should have been the first sign. Atlas always wagged 3 times sharp, enthusiastic, proud. But Marcus was too busy running through his mental checklist. Suspect secured, evidence tagged, team accounted for. The ride back to the precinct was silent, except for the hum of the engine. Atlas lay in his crate, his breathing shallow and measured. He'd been trained since puppyhood to suppress whimpers, to push through discomfort. Pain was just another obstacle to overcome. In the rearview mirror, Marcus glanced back once. Atlas's eyes were open, staring at nothing. "You tired, buddy?" No response. Dogs got tired after raids. It was normal. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. Atlas walked with his usual disciplined head up. Shoulders square, but his left hind leg dragged just a fraction of a second slower than the right. The veterinary tech on duty, a young woman named Sam, ran her hands over his body in the routine post-mission check. She felt along his ribs, pressed his abdomen, examined his paws. "He's good," she said, making a notation on her tablet. "Might be a little dehydrated. Make sure he drinks." What she didn't feel, what no one could see beneath the thick black fur and tactical vest, was the 3-inch gash where a piece of metal rebar had sliced through muscle during the breach. The vest had absorbed most of the impact, but the jagged edge had found the gap between panels. The wound was deep, hidden, bleeding slowly into the fur. Atlas knew. His body screamed at him with every step, a hot pulsing sensation that radiated from his side into his spine. But he also knew his job. He'd been taught that showing weakness meant failure. So he stood still during the examination, his dark eyes focused on a point beyond the walls, using every ounce of training to keep his breathing steady. Marcus filled Atlas's water bowl and set it down in the kennel. "Drink up, hero." The dog approached slowly, lowered his head, and lapped at the water with mechanical precision. 5 laps, then a pause. 5 more. Then he lay down, positioning himself carefully so his injured side faced the wall. In the dim light of the kennel, the bloodstain looked like shadow. 3 days passed. Marcus noticed Atlas seemed less enthusiastic during morning runs, slower to respond to commands. "Maybe he's getting older," another officer suggested. Atlas was only 4. Or maybe he needs a break. These raids take a toll. They decided to give him light duty for the week. No raids, just routine patrols and community events. That's how Atlas ended up at Lincoln Elementary School on a Thursday morning, part of a K-9 demonstration for the students. Children squealed with delight as Marcus walked Atlas through basic commands. Sit, stay, heel. The dog performed flawlessly, his posture perfect, despite the fire spreading through his left side with every movement. The wound had begun to fester. Infection was setting in, a silent invasion that no one suspected. But someone noticed. Her name was Clara Reyes, and she was 9 years old. She sat in the front row of the gymnasium, her hands resting on the guide dog harness beside her. Clara had been blind since birth, a genetic condition that left her eyes a pale, clouded gray. She couldn't see Atlas's shiny coat or the way his ears perked at attention. But when Marcus led the dog past her row during the demonstration, Clara's head tilted sharply to the side. "His breathing is wrong," she whispered to her aide, Mrs. Pacheco. The aide glanced at the dog. "He looks fine to me, sweetheart." "No," Clara insisted, her small hand gripping the armrest. It's like he's holding something in. When I had the flu and didn't want Mom to know." Mrs. Pacheco smiled gently. "Dogs don't hide things like that, Clara. He's a trained police dog." They'd know if something was wrong, but Clara wasn't convinced. She'd spent her entire life navigating a world through sound, touch, and intuition. She knew the difference between normal breathing and the careful, controlled breaths of someone trying not to show pain. She'd heard it in her own chest 100 times. The demonstration ended with applause. Marcus led Atlas toward the exit, waving to the children. Clara stood up, her guide dog a golden retriever named Sunny at her side. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice small but clear. "Excuse me, officer?" Marcus stopped, turning back. "Yes, sweetheart?" Clara stepped forward, her hand sliding along Sonny's harness for guidance. "Your dog," she said carefully. "Is he hurt?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Hurt? No, he's fine. Why do you ask?" "His breathing," Clara said. "It's not right. And when he walked past me, I could smell something." She wrinkled her nose. Like ... like metal and something sour. A few teachers chuckled nervously. Mrs. Pacheco touched Clara's shoulder. "That's very observant. But I'm sure the officer knows his dog better than anyone." Marcus crouched down to Clara's level, his expression kind. "I appreciate you worrying about him, but Atlas gets checked by a vet all the time. He's healthy as they come." He reached out and scratched behind Atlas's ears. The dog's tail gave a weak thump against the floor. Clara frowned. She wanted to argue, to explain that she knew something was wrong. But she was 9 years old. And adults rarely listened to 9-year-olds, especially when they were blind and couldn't see what they were talking about. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said quietly. But as Marcus led Atlas away, Clara stood frozen in place. Sonny nuzzled her hand, sensing her distress. "We have to do something," Clara whispered to her dog. "We have to." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring up at the darkness that was the same whether her eyes were open or closed. The smell from the gymnasium haunted her, metallic and wrong, like the time her older brother had cut his hand and refused to tell their parents until it got infected. She'd smelled that same sour wrongness then, too. She thought about the dog's breathing, about the careful way he'd moved, about the tiny hitch in his step that no one else seemed to hear. By morning, Clara had made up her mind. She didn't know how, but she was going to help that dog. Because if there was one thing Clara Reyes understood, it was what it felt like to be overlooked, to have people assume that because you couldn't see, you couldn't know. And she knew, deep in her bones, that the police dog was dying. Friday morning arrived with a cold front that turned the October air sharp. Clara's mother, Elena, bundled her daughter into a thick jacket before the school bus came. "You're quiet this morning, Mia," Elena said, braiding Clara's dark hair. "Everything okay?" Clara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd spent the entire night thinking about the police dog, about the wrongness she'd sensed. "Mom," she said carefully, "if you thought someone was hurt, but nobody believed you, what would you do?" Elena paused, her fingers still tangled in Clara's hair. "That's a heavy question for breakfast. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering." Elena tied off the braid with a soft smile. "Well, I think if you really believed someone needed help, you'd find a way to help them. Even if it was hard. Even if people didn't understand." She kissed the top of Clara's head. "But you'd have to be smart about it. And safe." Clara filed that advice away as the school bus rumbled to a stop outside their house. Sonny guided her down the steps, and soon they were on their way to Lincoln Elementary. Clara counted the turns, 3 rights, 1 left, then the long straightaway before the school. She knew this route by heart. At school, Clara went through her usual routine. Morning reading circle. Math with the tactile blocks she used to understand numbers, then recess. But during lunch, she asked Mrs. Pacheco a question that caught her aide off guard. "Where do police dogs live?" Mrs. Pacheco looked up from her sandwich. "Oh, they usually live with their handlers. Like a normal pet, but they also work together." "Why? And where do they go if they're sick?" "To a veterinarian, I'd imagine." "Clara, are you still thinking about that dog from yesterday?" Clara took a careful bite of her apple. Just curious, but she wasn't just curious, she was planning. After school, when her mother picked her up, Clara asked if they could go to the library. "I need to research something for a project," she said. It wasn't exactly a lie, it was a project, just one the teachers didn't assign. At the library, Clara asked the librarian, Mrs. Huang, to help her access the audiobook database. "I'm looking for books about police dogs," she explained, "and how they're trained." Mrs. Huang was delighted. "Oh, what a wonderful topic. Let me pull up some options for you." For the next hour, Clara listened through headphones to a documentary narration about canine units. She learned that police dogs were trained to ignore pain, to prioritize their mission above everything else. She learned that handlers relied on visual cues, limping, whining, refusal to work to identify injuries. And she learned that some injuries, especially puncture wounds or internal damage, could go unnoticed until it was too late. Her chest tightened. She'd been right. On Saturday morning, Clara convinced her mother to take her and Sonny for a walk downtown. "I just want to get some fresh air," she said. Elena agreed, grateful that Clara wanted to explore more of the city. They walked 3 blocks to the town square, where a small farmer's market was in full swing. Clara's real destination was the police station, which sat 2 blocks east of the square. She'd memorized the route from a tactile map Mrs. Pacheco had once shown her. "Mom," Clara said as they walked, "can we go see the police station? I've never been there, and I want to know what it feels like." Elena hesitated. "It's not really a place for tours, sweetheart. Please? Just for a minute?" Elena sighed but relented. "All right, just a quick look." The station was a squat brick building with heavy glass doors. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. Clara stood just inside the entrance, her head turning slightly as she listened. Footsteps echoed down a hallway to the left. A phone rang somewhere in the back. Voices murmured behind a desk. And then she heard it, a low, pained whine, barely audible, coming from deeper in the building. Clara's hand tightened on Sonny's harness. "Do they keep dogs here?" She asked the desk officer, a middle-aged woman with a kind face. "We have a K9 unit," the officer replied. "They have kennels in the back. Why do you ask?" "I just love dogs," Clara said, forcing a smile. But her heart was pounding. That whine. She'd heard it. She was sure. Elena thanked the officer and gently guided Clara back outside. "Satisfied?" she asked. Clara nodded, but inside her mind was racing. The dog was still here, still suffering. And no one was listening. That night, Clara did something she'd never done before. She snuck out. Well, snuck was a strong word. She waited until her parents were asleep, then carefully felt her way down the hallway with Sonny at her side. The front door was locked, but Clara had memorized the sound of the deadbolt turning. Click. She eased it open, praying it wouldn't squeak. The October air bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside. She'd never been out this late alone, never navigated the streets without her mother or an aide. But Clara had been preparing her whole life for this moment without knowing it. Every curb she'd memorized, every street sound she'd cataloged, every skill she'd developed to move through a world designed for the sighted, it all came together now. Sonny, sensing her determination, stayed close. Clara counted steps, listened for cars, felt the changes in pavement texture beneath her feet. The walk downtown took 20 minutes, far longer than in the car. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the police station, but she'd made it. The building was dark except for a single light near the back entrance. Clara circled around, her fingers trailing along the brick wall. She found a gate locked, but not high. She could hear something beyond it. Breathing. Movement. The soft rustle of straw. "Hello?" she whispered. "Are you there?" Silence. Then a low whimper. Clara's breath caught. "It's okay," she said softly. "I want to help you." She didn't know how long she stood there, speaking gently into the darkness. But eventually she heard footsteps approaching. Heavy boots. An adult. "Hey, what are you doing back here?" Clara froze. A flashlight beam swept over her, not that she could see it, and then a man's voice, sharp with concern. "You're just a kid. What are you doing out here alone? And at this hour?" Clara's voice trembled. I needed to check on the dog. The one from my school. He's hurt." The officer, a tall man named Rodriguez, stared at her in disbelief. "The K9, Alice? He's fine." "And you shouldn't be here. Does your mom know where you are?" "No," Clara admitted. "But please, you have to check him. He's hurt and no one believes me." Rodriguez sighed, crouching down. "Kid, I don't know what you think you saw. I didn't see anything," Clara interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "I heard him. I smelled him." "Something's wrong." Rodriguez paused. There was something about the girl's conviction, the way her clouded eyes stared straight ahead with absolute certainty that made him hesitate. "All right," he said slowly. "I'll check on him. But then I'm calling your parents and taking you home. Deal?" Clara nodded quickly. "Deal." Rodriguez led her to the kennel area, flipping on lights as he went. Atlas lay in his crate, his head resting on his paws. He looked up when they entered, his tail giving a weak thump. "See?" Rodriguez said. "He's fine." But Clara stepped closer, tilting her head. "No. Listen to his breathing. It's shallow. And there's that smell again." Rodriguez frowned. He knelt down, opening the crate. Atlas stood slowly, and for the first time, Rodriguez noticed the dog's slight hesitation. He ran his hand along Atlas's side and froze. His fingers came away damp and dark, blood. Jesus, Rodriguez breathed. He lifted Atlas's vest, revealing the matted, infected wound beneath. How did we miss this? Clara stood by the door, her arms wrapped around Sonny. She didn't say, I told you so. She didn't need to. Rodriguez grabbed his radio. I need the vet on call. Now. We have an injured K9. As the station erupted into activity, Clara felt Sonny press against her leg. She knelt down, burying her face in the dog's fur. We did it, she whispered. But the night was far from over. Atlas was rushed to the emergency veterinary clinic at 2:34 a.m. Clara's parents arrived at the station 15 minutes later, panicked and furious. Elena wrapped her daughter in a crushing hug while Clara's father, David, demanded to know how a 9-year-old blind girl had managed to walk halfway across town alone in the middle of the night. But beneath the anger, there was awe, because Clara had saved a life. The vet, a composed woman named Dr. Singh, worked for 3 hours to clean and suture the infected wound. Another day or two and the sepsis would have been irreversible, she told Marcus Webb, who stood pale and shaking in the waiting room. I don't know how she knew, Marcus couldn't answer. He kept replaying the school visit in his mind, the little girl with the clouded eyes, asking if Atlas was hurt. He dismissed her, smiled kindly, and moved on. And his partner had nearly died because of it. Atlas survived the surgery, but his recovery would take weeks. The department launched an internal review. How had such a serious injury gone unnoticed? How had every checkpoint, every protocol failed? The answers were uncomfortable. The vest had hidden the wound. The dog's training had suppressed the pain response. And everyone had assumed that because Atlas was a police dog, he was invincible. Clara became a local sensation overnight. The story spread, blind girl saves K9 officer. News crews showed up at her school. Her principal gave an assembly about her bravery. But Clara hated the attention. She wasn't a hero, she'd just done what no one else would. What Clara didn't expect was the lawsuit. 6 weeks after Atlas's surgery, a letter arrived at the Reyes household. It was from a law firm representing a man named Victor Kane, the suspect Atlas had helped apprehend during the warehouse raid. Kane was suing the police department, claiming his arrest was unlawful because Atlas had been injured and therefore unfit for duty. He argued that the evidence found during the raid should be thrown out, and he subpoenaed Clara as a witness. Elena nearly fainted when she read the summons. They want her to testify? She's 9 years old, David immediately called a lawyer. This is absurd. Clara had nothing to do with the arrest. She just noticed the dog was hurt after the fact. But Kane's attorney, a slick man named Preston Hall, had a different angle. He argued that if a blind 9-year-old could detect Atlas's injury from a single encounter, then Officer Webb, who worked with the dog daily, should have known. It was negligence. The entire raid was compromised. The trial was set for December. Clara didn't understand most of the legal talk, but she understood one thing. People were angry at her for helping. She heard it in the whispers at school, in the tight voices of teachers who didn't know she was listening. Some officers at the precinct blamed her for the investigation. If that kid had just kept her mouth shut, one muttered, none of this would have happened. But Clara also had supporters. Officer Rodriguez visited her at home, bringing Sonny a new toy. You did the right thing, he told her. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. And then there was Marcus. He showed up at the Reyes house one evening, holding his hat in his hands. Elena answered the door, her expression wary. Officer Webb, I need to talk to Clara, Marcus said quietly. Please. Elena hesitated, then called her daughter. Clara came to the door, Sonny at her side. She couldn't see Marcus's face, but she could hear the weight in his voice. I owe you an apology, Marcus began. You tried to tell me Atlas was hurt, and I didn't listen. I thought I knew better, and I almost lost him because of it. His voice cracked. You saved my partner's life, and I'll never forget that. Clara stood silent for a moment. Then she said, Is he okay now? He's healing, slowly, but he's going to make it. Good, Clara said simply. Marcus crouched down. This trial, it's not your fault. None of it is. I want you to know that. But Clara wasn't sure she believed him. The day of the trial arrived cold and gray. The courthouse was a massive building with echoing hallways and too many voices. Clara held her mother's hand tightly as they entered the courtroom. She'd never been anywhere so loud and chaotic footsteps, rustling papers, whispered conversations all blending into an overwhelming wall of sound. Preston Hall, Kane's attorney, was a tall man with a sharp voice. He called Clara to the stand, and she walked forward carefully, Sonny guiding her to the witness box. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Nguyen, spoke gently. Miss Reyes, do you understand that you need to tell the truth today? Yes, ma'am, Clara said. Hall began his questioning. Miss Reyes, you claim you detected that the police dog Atlas was injured during a school visit. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And how exactly did you know this, given that you cannot see? Clara's hands tightened in her lap. I heard his breathing. It was wrong, careful, like he was trying to hide pain. And you smelled something? Yes, blood and infection, Hall paced. Interesting. So you, a child with no medical training, were able to identify an injury that trained officers and a veterinary technician missed. Does that seem plausible to you? Objection, the prosecutor, Ms. Diaz, cut in. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Nguyen said. But Hall wasn't done. Miss Reyes, isn't it possible you simply imagined this? That you wanted attention and created a dramatic story? Clara's jaw tightened. No. But you can't prove what you heard or smelled. It's just your word. I can prove it, Clara said quietly. Atlas almost died. The vet said so. Hall smiled coldly. But that happened after the arrest. The question is whether Officer Webb should have known before. And if a blind child could detect the injury, shouldn't a trained handler have noticed? Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She understood now. They were using her to hurt Marcus. To hurt Atlas. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but her voice felt small and trapped. Then the courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. Officer Marcus Webb entered, and beside him, limping slightly but standing tall, was Atlas. The courtroom erupted. Judge Nguyen banged her gavel. Order! Who authorized this? Marcus approached the bench. Your Honor, I know this is irregular, but I need to say something. Officer Webb. You're not on the stand. I should have listened to her, Marcus interrupted, his voice raw. Clara Reyes told me my partner was hurt, and I dismissed her. I assumed I knew better because I'm an adult, because I'm trained, because I've worked with Atlas for years. But she knew something I didn't. She paid attention in a way I'd forgotten how to. He looked at Clara. That little girl has more courage and compassion than I've seen in 20 years on the force. And if Mr. Kane wants to tear apart this case, then he should be looking at me, not her. Atlas, as if understanding, walked slowly to Clara's side. The courtroom fell silent. The dog pressed his head against her hand. Clara's fingers found his fur, felt the rise and fall of his breathing steady now, healthy. And then Atlas did something no one expected. He placed his paw on her knee and looked up not at Marcus, not at the judge, but directly at the jury. It was a gesture of trust, of protection. Clara whispered, "You're okay now." Preston Hall stared, his prepared questions evaporating. Judge Nguyen removed her glasses, blinking rapidly. Even the stenographer had stopped typing. What happened next would be talked about for years. The silence in the courtroom stretched impossibly long. Clara couldn't see the faces staring at her, couldn't see the jurors, leaning forward in their seats for the reporters frantically taking notes. But she felt the shift in the room. The air had changed. Tension had transformed into something else. Something softer. Judge Nguyen cleared her throat. Mr. Hall, do you have further questions for this witness? Preston Hall stood frozen, his expensive suit suddenly looking too tight. He'd built his entire case on the premise that a child's testimony was unreliable, that her claims were exaggerated, that she couldn't possibly know what she claimed to know. But now a 70-pound German Shepherd, a decorated K-9 officer, was making his own testimony, and it was devastating. I know, Your Honor, Hall finally said. No further questions. Miss Diaz, the prosecutor, stood. Your Honor, I'd like to redirect. Proceed. Miss Diaz approached Clara gently. Clara, I only have one question for you. Why did you help Atlas? Clara tilted her head, considering. Because nobody else would listen to him, she said simply. And I know what that feels like. Miss Diaz nodded slowly. Thank you. Nothing further. Judge Nguyen allowed Clara to step down. Marcus helped guide her back to her mother, Atlas walking beside them. As Clara passed the jury box, she heard something unexpected. One of the jurors was crying. soft, muffled sobs that the woman was trying to hide. The trial continued for 2 more days, but everyone knew the outcome had already been decided. The defense tried to argue that Officer Webb's failure to notice Atlas's injury constituted negligence, but the prosecution countered with expert testimony from veterinarians and canine trainers. They explained how dogs, especially highly trained working dogs, could mask pain. They showed photographs of the tactical vest and how it had concealed the wound. They brought in Dr. Singh, who testified that even during her initial emergency examination, the injury had been difficult to locate. This wasn't negligence, Dr. Singh stated firmly. This was a perfect storm of factors that could have happened to any handler. What's remarkable isn't that the injury was missed. It's that a young girl, using only her other senses, detected something that everyone else overlooked. But the most powerful testimony came from someone unexpected: Victor Kane's own cellmate. A man named Raymond Torres took the stand and testified that Kane had admitted to setting a trap. During the warehouse raid specifically, he'd positioned metal debris near the entry point, hoping to injure responding officers or canine units. He bragged about it, Torres said. Said if he hurt a cop or a dog, maybe he'd get a lighter sentence. Said they'd feel bad for him. The courtroom erupted again. Kane's attorney objected vehemently, but the damage was done. The jury heard that Kane had deliberately caused Atlas's injury, that his lawsuit was built on harm he'd inflicted. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The arrest was lawful, the evidence admissible, and Kane's lawsuit dismissed with prejudice. Moreover, the judge added additional charges against Kane for animal cruelty and obstruction of justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Marcus and Clara. Cameras flashed, though Clara couldn't see them. She could hear the rapid-fire clicks, feel the press of bodies. Elena tried to shield her daughter, but Clara stood her ground. Clara, how does it feel to be a hero? Are you going to join the police when you grow up? What do you want to say to other kids with disabilities? Clara waited until the voices quieted slightly. Then she spoke, her voice clear despite her nervousness. I'm not a hero, I just paid attention. Maybe if more people did that, really listened, really noticed, we wouldn't miss so much. That quote would be printed in newspapers across the country. But for Clara, the most important moment came later that evening. Marcus brought Atlas to the Reyes home for a private visit. The dog was still recovering, still moving carefully, but his eyes were bright and his tail wagged properly, 3 sharp, enthusiastic thumps. Clara sat on the floor with him, her fingers exploring his face. She felt the softness of his ears, the wet coolness of his nose, the strong muscles of his neck. Atlas leaned into her touch, his body relaxing completely. For a dog trained to always be on alert, this was surrender. This was trust. He knows you saved him, Marcus said quietly. Dogs remember. They remember kindness, Clara smiled. I think he saved me too. Elena brought out cookies, and David offered Marcus coffee. They sat together in the living room, 2 families connected by an invisible wound that had somehow brought them all closer. Sonny and Atlas lay side by side, the guide dog and the police dog both resting after their own battles. I've been thinking, Marcus said, setting down his mug. The department wants to do something to honor Clara. A commendation, maybe a ceremony. Elena shook her head. She doesn't need medals. She just needs people to understand that being blind doesn't mean being helpless. I know, Marcus said. But there's something else. We want to start a program training officers to recognize hidden injuries in Canine South. And we want Clara to help develop it. Clara looked up sharply. Me? You, Marcus confirmed. You noticed things we missed because you pay attention differently. We need that perspective. We need you to teach us how to listen better. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Will Atlas be there? Marcus smiled. Every session. And so it began. The Canine Awareness Program, informally known as Clara's Protocol, launched 3 months later. Clara became a consultant, working with veterinarians and trainers to develop new assessment techniques. She taught officers to trust their other senses, to notice changes in breathing or smell, to recognize the subtle signs of hidden pain. Atlas, fully recovered, returned to active duty. But Marcus made changes too. He learned to slow down, to observe, to question his assumptions. And once a week, he brought Atlas to visit Clara at her school. The two became inseparable, the blind girl and the wounded dog, both of whom had taught the world to see differently. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth. The city shook off winter's gray shroud, and Lincoln Elementary's playground filled with the sounds of children laughing. Clara sat under her favorite tree during recess, Sunny's head resting in her lap, listening to the chaos of a kickball game nearby. She heard footsteps approaching, measured, purposeful. She recognized them before the person spoke. "Mind if I join you?" "Hi, Officer Webb," Clara said, smiling. "Where's Atlas?" "He's coming." Had to grab something from the car. Marcus sat down beside her, groaning slightly. "Getting too old to sit on the ground," he muttered. "You're not old," Clara said. "My dad is old. He makes noises when he stands up," Marcus laughed. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Marcus said, "I have something for you." "For me?" "Well, for you and Sunny, technically." Clara heard a car door slam, then the distinct sound of Atlas's paws on concrete. But there was something else, another set of paws, lighter, quicker. Clara tilted her head. "Is someone with him?" "See for yourself," Marcus said, then immediately winced. "Sorry. I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Clara interrupted, laughing. "I say, see you later all the time." Atlas approached and pressed his nose into Clara's hand, his tail wagging with full strength. But then another nose appeared, smaller, cooler, tentatively sniffing Clara's knee. "Who's this?" Clara whispered. "This," Marcus said, "is Luna." Clara's hands found the puppy's face. Luna was small, maybe 4 months old, with oversized paws and soft, floppy ears. She wiggled with excitement, her entire body wagging. Clara laughed as the puppy licked her fingers. "She's a German Shepherd, like Atlas," Marcus explained. "We rescued her from a shelter. She was found abandoned in a park, probably dumped by a backyard breeder. She's got some anxiety issues, scared of loud noises, nervous around new people. The shelter was going to have trouble adopting her out." Clara felt a tightness in her chest. "That's terrible. We thought so too," Marcus continued. "But here's the thing, Atlas took to her immediately. And when we brought her to your house last week while you were at school, Sunny did too. They calmed her down. Made her feel safe." Clara's hand stilled. "You brought her to my house?" "With your parents' permission," Marcus added quickly. "We had a long conversation with them about this." Clara heard her mother's voice then, approaching from behind. "Mia, we wanted to surprise you." "Mom?" Clara turned, confused. "What's going on?" Elena sat down on Clara's other side. "Officer Webb and the police department want to give you Luna, as a thank you. But also because they think you two need each other." Clara's breath caught. "Give her to me? Like, she'd be mine?" "If you want her," Marcus said. "She won't be a guide dog. She doesn't have the temperament for that kind of work. But she could be your companion, your friend. And honestly, I think she needs someone like you. Someone patient. Someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated." Clara buried her face in Luna's soft fur, overwhelmed. The puppy squirmed closer, her tiny heartbeat racing against Clara's chest. "She's really mine?" Clara whispered. "She's really yours," Elena confirmed, her own voice thick with emotion. "If you want her, I want her," Clara said immediately. Then louder, laughing through tears. "I want her." Luna barked a high, squeaky sound that made everyone laugh. Atlas sat proudly beside them, his tail thumping approval. Sunny, ever patient, simply rested her chin on Clara's leg, as if welcoming the newest member of their family. Marcus cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. The department, we've established a scholarship fund in your name. For kids with disabilities who want to work with animals or go into veterinary medicine. Clara's Hope Foundation." Clara couldn't speak. She held Luna tighter, feeling the puppy's warmth, her trust, her need. This tiny abandoned creature who'd been overlooked and discarded, just like Atlas had been overlooked when he was injured. Just like Clara herself had been dismissed when she tried to help. "Thank you," Clara finally managed. "For listening." "No," Marcus said softly. "Thank you for teaching us how." 6 months later, the gymnasium at Lincoln Elementary was packed for the K-9 Awareness Program graduation. 20 officers from surrounding counties had completed Clara's protocol training. They stood in neat rows, their K-9 partners beside them, as Chief Morrison gave the closing remarks. But the real ceremony happened quietly in the back of the room. Clara sat with Luna curled in her lap, the once anxious puppy now confident and calm. Atlas lay at her feet, ever watchful. Sunny sat on her other side, the 3 dogs forming a protective circle around the girl who'd saved them all in different ways. A young officer approached nervously. Miss Reyes? I'm Officer Chun. I just wanted to say my K9 bear started limping yesterday. Before your training, I would have pushed through, figured he was fine, but I remembered what you taught us. I checked him. Torn pad. Would have gotten infected if I'd waited. Clara smiled. How is he now? Healing. Because of you. Chun walked away and Clara felt Luna shift in her arms. The puppy was growing fast, already 20 pounds, with paws that promised she'd be as big as Atlas someday. She still got nervous during thunderstorms, still startled at sudden noises. But she was learning, healing, just like Atlas had healed. Just like Clara had healed something broken in herself. The feeling that being different meant being less. Marcus appeared beside her, ready to go home. Yeah, Clara said, standing carefully. Luna hopped down, immediately pressing against her leg. Atlas and Sunny flanked them as they walked toward the exit, outside. The spring afternoon was warm and bright, though Clara experienced it as birdsong and the smell of fresh-cut grass and the feeling of sun on her face. Luna barked at something, probably a squirrel. Atlas huffed, as if embarrassed by the puppy's enthusiasm. Sunny simply guided Clara forward, steady and sure. Clara? Marcus said as they reached his car. I never asked you something. What? That night you snuck out to find Atlas. You couldn't see where you were going. You'd never walked that road alone. Weren't you scared? Clara considered this. Terrified, she admitted. But sometimes being scared just means something matters enough to be brave about. Marcus smiled. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, Clara said matter-of-factly. People just weren't listening. She climbed into the car, Luna scrambling in beside her. As they drove through the city past the police station where Atlas had almost died, past the courthouse where Clara had stood her ground, past all the places where she'd been underestimated and overlooked, Clara felt something settle deep in her chest. She wasn't a hero. She'd never wanted to be. But she'd learned something precious. That seeing wasn't always about eyes. That strength wasn't always about sight. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply pay attention when everyone else looked away. Atlas turned from the front seat and looked back at her. Clara couldn't see his dark eyes, but she felt his gaze, felt his gratitude, his love, and in her lap Luna slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams abandoned puppies have when they finally find home. That night, the dog didn't just save a life. He saved hope. And the blind girl who'd saved him taught the world a truth they'd forgotten, that the most important things are often invisible to the eyes. You have to see them with your heart.